and only a certain group of people have access to it, you can imagine, I mean, this is kind of rarefied knowledge. If you're going to take, copper out of the soil, these copper prills, and I don't know, has anybody seen what copper looks like, copper ore, just in its rough state? It just looks like green sort of rocks, right, with copper oxide in it. It's a very complicated process. You have to break it down, you have to fire it at high temperatures, you need specialized knowledge, and you can see very clearly how this limitation of knowledge could be linked to ritual and religion, almost a magical process, if you will. So anyway, and we actually have bull sacrifices that take place in that same context too. So a number of parallels between Nkomi and Ugarit. We know the two were in contact. And as we said before, right, when we looked at the city of Ugarit itself, when you stand on top of the citadel, and then on top of that temple of Baal, looking out at the ocean, right, you're 40 meters up off the sea, you can actually see the tip of Cyprus. So if you're traveling from Nkomi, it becomes very easy to just jump up the Karpas Peninsula here and then make your way over to the course. So Nkomi and Nkomi and Ugarit in many ways are sister cities. And we'll look at some of the correspondence between them in a moment. Some of the other Cypriot exports during this period, very interesting. Cypriot pottery is very, very fine. It's handmade ware, and it's very particular. Again, you're looking at forms that we haven't seen anywhere else, and this stuff gets shipped in mass during the late Bronze Age. In fact, it becomes so prevalent that when you excavate in the Near East, when you find Cypriot pottery, it becomes a type indicator for those sites. So you find this and you say, aha, this layer dates to the late Bronze Age. And what's nice is that it changes regularly, so you can differentiate between the LB1, the LB2, and so on. Two basic types of Cypriot pottery in the late Bronze Age. The first is called white slip ware. And you can see it here. The reason it's called white slip ware, it's got this lovely cream sort of color to it. And a slip, by the way, just those of you who, maybe some of you have done pottery, you make the vessel and then you dip the entire vessel or you paint the vessel in a liquid clay of another color, right? So that's called slipping, when you cover it with a thin layer of clay that gives it a certain patina or a certain effect that you like. So this is white slip. And its form is very delicate, these large hemispheric bowls. And we know these bowls were actually shipped to the mainland. We find at places like Ugarit, places along the Levantine coast, sections of them actually stacked one in the other, where they would have just come over from the Cypriot mainland. And it's not exactly clear what these were used for. Possibly, there have been a lot of theories that they're milk bowls. They're often called milk bowls. That they might have been used for a hot liquid because they have this wishbone handle that sticks off the side. It's also thought that they might be emulating ostrich eggs. And in the Middle Bronze Age, there's limited evidence for ostrich egg vessels that would have been painted in a similar way. So again, maybe what we're looking at is a copy of a luxury import. You know, if you can get your hands on an ostrich egg vessel, of course, that has to come from Africa. That's a luxury good. Well, now you have Cypriots that might be actually creating, again, a fake Louis Vuitton bag, a luxury vessel, but now made in clay. So those are white slip vessels. The other is base ring ware. And base ring ware is interesting for a number of reasons. The typical form that we get for base ring ware are in these small juglets. And these juglets, they're called bilbil jars. I know these funny names that again, excavators give to these vessels and then they stick. They're called bilbil jars because when you fill them up and you pour them out, they go bil, 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 bil. Don't ask me why that name stuck, but base ringware is the official name. Bilbil jars are the other way. Bilbil containers. But again, these are very, very small, typically. And there are larger ones for mixing water and wine, but typically the ones that we find are very, very small. And they would have carried some sort of unguent, some sort of perfume, a very rare and very fine commodity. And we find these across the Levant. We find them all the way in Upper Egypt, actually, during this time, too. So whatever is in these things is being traded extensively across the ancient Near East. In the 1960s, a scholar named Robert Merriles put out a theory that in looking at the shape of these vessels, what he saw was an upside-down poppy blossom. So if you actually turn this on its head and you compare it to a poppy blossom, there are a lot of similarities, right? With this flange base. And also some of the decoration on the outside of these bilbil jars, right? You can see these cross-hatching techniques, right? So actually what he thought these were containers for opium. And that opium was being traded at this very early time, right, from around 1400 to 1200 BC, across the Middle East. And of course people thought he was completely crazy. They said, it's the 60s, and Robert Merriles, you don't know what you're talking about. You have this, he's saying that the Cypriots are drug dealers, essentially. Actually, in the last 7 or 8 years, these vessels have finally been tested, and they proved that Robert Merriles was indeed correct, that these vessels actually carried opium, and that opium was being traded extensively from Cyprus, where it was harvested and then transferred out across the Near East. So again, a container that sort of, again, is self-referential. And we see this in other aspects of Cypriot pottery too. We'll get to this with the Iron Age. Just like those necklaces that we saw, the Cypriot pottery in this period is, again, self-referential. And so it's very, very interesting. And again, the implications are huge when you start thinking about drug usage in Egypt and in the ancient Near East. And again, we don't imagine that Amenhotep III was just spending all his days completely loaded and blitzed out of his mind. You can imagine the uses for opium. We use opium today, right, in medicine, for medicinal purposes as well. So it's not just the drug trade, but it also could have been used for medicine as opposed to recreational use. Anyway, we've now looked at Egypt, we've looked at Elashia, the Hittite Empire, Mitanni, Assyria, Babylon in the late Bronze Age. And we're now shifting away because around 1200 BC, this all changes. Everything begins to fall apart. This wonderful network of international trade begins to crumble. We see a series of major destructions around 1200. Hattusis, around 1180, is violently burned to the ground and not resettled. Ugarit is destroyed, also not resettled. In Greece, palaces like the one that we saw at Pylos, at Mycenae, those are destroyed. Actually, they're destroyed a little bit before these other ones. We'll get to that in a moment. Inland cities of Syria, like Alalak, Kadesh, all of these are burned. And it's very interesting because the ancient Near East falls into a bit of a dark age for about 100 years or so. It's not until the 10th century that we start seeing a recovery, and when that happens, the world is a very different place with new states and new peoples. We see the emergence of Israel, ancient Israel, and then also the Philistines. We'll talk about the Philistines in a bit. So what caused this? What caused this great collapse? Well, one of the favorite examples of this cause is the onslaught of a group of people known as the Sea Peoples around 1180 BCE. And the Sea Peoples are known from a number of texts. We have some letters that come from the city of Ugarit itself. It's actually quite interesting because in the main courtyard at the palace in the city of Ugarit, about 100 tablets were found in an oven. They were abandoned there, they were being fired, and so they seem to date to the actual point of destruction of the city itself. So we have texts that date to the fall of the city of Ugarit itself. They were just left there. About 100 tablets or so. And they mention a group of people that are mentioned in the Amarna texts, the Hapiru. I'll write them up. The Hapiru appear to be a semi-nomadic people that really plague all of these kingdoms, especially in the southern Levant. They're a big problem for the Egyptians, for the Hittites, for Mitanni. They're always talking about the Hapiru, right? These raids that are taking place by these semi-nomadic people that are a thorn in the side of our settled, established kingdoms. So the Hapiru are mentioned in this context. Actually, Hapiru seems to have a relation to Hebrew. There was a push for a long time to sort of see these as early Israelite tribes. That theory is debunked now. There's not really anything to support it other than a little bit of similarity in the names. But what we do know about the Hapiru is that they appear to be these raiders, these semi-nomadic raiders that really cause a lot of trouble. So the Hapiru show up at this late date in the text at Ugarit, along with a request for 150 ships to be sent to Ugarit to help defend it. And we see letters being sent between the king of Ugarit and the king of Elashia, in which the king of Ugarit is really sort of laying out a very, very dire state. Actually, one of the letters reads, "Behold, the enemy's ships came here, and my cities were burned, and they did evil things to my country. And now all my ships are in the land of Lycia. Thus the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it that the 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted tremendous damage upon us." And he actually concludes the letter by telling the king of Elashia, look, if you have any news about these raiders who are coming, then let me know, right? Keep me updated on what the situation is. These raiders from the sea. Similarly, we see, just jump ahead here. I don't know why that slides there. We see evidence of these raiders from the sea, these mysterious sea peoples from Egyptian inscriptions as well. The Mereneptah inscription at Karnak, he actually mentions that he conquered and then used mercenaries coming from all lands or the countries of the sea. Probably the most famous example that we have is from the time of Ramses III. We mentioned this when we were talking about Egypt a week or two ago. And this inscription comes from the funerary temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu and dates the 8th year of his reign, around 1176. And it records his battles against a group of people that are moving from the south and seem to be coming to the Levant by both sea and by land. He lists the tribes of these people, the Checker, the Sheklesh, the Dedan, the Shurdan, and the Pelset. The Pelset, as we'll see, are related to our Philistines, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's very interesting and very rare to see a naval battle such as this one depicted. What's more, these battles sort of are put in context by Ramses III, first Mereneptah, then Ramses III. And Ramses III mentions that the lands were on the move, which has been taken to mean not just an invasion, but a large-scale migration of people. And indeed, when we look at these texts a little bit closer, and I'm sorry these aren't very clear, we actually see not just battles taking place, but the movement of wicker